To set up this first demonstration, we're going to take a quick look at the basics around network RPA, how you build, test, deploy, and monitor process automation. And so what that kind of looks like when you're using the app is this, again, it's a NetDevOps approach where you're going to build, you're going to execute a test and verification that it's working. You can deploy, meaning you can deploy to production, or you could actually deploy to test and keep it in test if you're still planning on tuning or tweaking it. And then as you're operating it, you're looking at the logs and making sure it's executing properly. And then you're monitoring it. You're in the phase where you're running it, monitoring it, see if you're getting the expected results time after time of running it, and then potentially tweaking and repeating the cycle. So you may iterate on the automation you're working on through, let's say, cloning a production workflow back to draft and then iterating, or maybe you're adding layers or steps, and we're going to take a look at, I would say, a lot of this in the very first demo. So let's switch over to the application here, get signed in. And as you land in Gluware, you're gonna, this is the dashboard. This is the device manager view. You could be looking at your dashboard. This is kind of the standard Gluware app login and view. Let's say, if we look at my inventory, I'm sitting here with my test inventory. And what you're going to see net new for Network RPA is on your left-hand nav. You're going to see the new Network RPA logo and app name. And you're typically going to be navigating into your workflow library if you're going to be potentially creating and curating your existing workflows. So let's take a look at, if you're going to kind of start from scratch, what that looks like. You're going to come up and execute a new workflow. Call this webinar demo, and then next you're going to assign it as public or private. If you assign it as public, then other users in your org and the kind of children orgs will have visibility of this workflow. And then you can see the 5 different levels of role-based access control as well. So a little bit of control there in terms of who can see it and run it as well. So let's move on to next. So now when the workflow name is essentially named and created, you're starting off with the drag and drop canvas. And what we're going to do in a kind of first getting started demo with Gluware, we're going to kind of automate the automation as I talked about. So when you think of the Gluware application suite, along the left-hand side, you have Device Manager and Drift and Audit, OS Manager, Config Modeling. Previously or continually, you're going to be going into these applications and doing various automations. Now at the Network RPA level, you can think about kind of orchestrating those or stringing actions from each app into an end-to-end workflow. And so what that looks like from Device Manager, you're usually doing an action where you're selecting or filtering your devices. So I'll just drag and drop that in. You drag and drop it in. And some of the tasks require configuration. So that particular device, that task does require configuration, and we'll get to that. And then let's look at drift and audit. If I was going to be doing a drift, I would be first probably capturing the current config, because I want to drift off the current config. And then I may want to execute a snapshot comparison, and so that's what this next task is. So you can see, with Gluware, the workflow is very much of choose your tasks, drag and drop them into your workflow, and then you can click in and edit them. When you're clicking in and editing them, you have a dialog here where you can apply various things like filters or a form fill to capture user input. So in this example here around filter, I can add a rule for I'm gonna use variable name. So the name contains Cisco, and so this is a filter. So this will filter on any devices that have the name Cisco, and it'll apply that. So that's all I would need to do. You can see there's numerous other things you could look at. You could look at advisories, you can look at operational state, you can look at all kinds of things to filter your device list, and I just click save here. So that's literally as simple as it is to build out a workflow without any programming. It's basically understanding what you want to do from the tasks you have, drag and drop them in, configure them, and then you can get into logical parameters and things like that. So what I'm going to do is, just for, let's say, hygiene, I will go ahead and save this workflow, because I may want to come back to it. And I'm going to navigate into my navigate into my workflow library. So from my workflow library, what I want to do is, instead of kind of building this all out manually and seeing every point and click, we're going to go ahead and start editing a workflow that already exists, which is a bit more complicated. It would take a couple minutes to build out, but instead of showing you every drag and drop and click, I'm going to just show you real quickly what's built out. So I'm filtering on name contains Cisco, as I showed you before. And then I'm executing a capture, I'm executing a compare. Then I'm layering in some business logic here, right? So I'm doing an if then. If the device property, and I have a rule, if config drifted equals no, I'm going to continue on this path here. And then there's an else. So the else logic, it goes into this path. So if config drifted is a no, it's going to go this way. If it has drifted, it's going to go this way. I'm going to have an email notification, and then I'm going to hit a provision device, which will remediate, and then it will come down here to run an audit policy. If I click into this task, I'm running my Cisco standard config audit. That just happens to be one of the audits that I have in my underlying config drift and audit. After it runs the audit policy, I see another logical operator. If audit violation count is, if it equals 0, meaning no violations, I continue on this good path. Otherwise, I have, even after configuring and potentially remediating, if I have violations, I'll come over here and send an email saying, although I've drifted and remediated potentially, I got to this point, I audited, and I still had an audit violation, so I'm going to notify the user to, potentially take a manual intervention, or kind of basically say, hey, there's a notification that there's an audit, you need to go take a look and dig deeper into this. So again, this is like, if I can zoom in, zoom out of this this template area, this workflow area. You have other here where you can close out or maximize that screen here. You can look at your annotations. You can click this button to see the entire thing on the screen. You can zoom in, zoom out via here, and you can also look at the validation here as well. So let's take this a step further and move into validation. So after we've done any edits, we go ahead and we validate. This is successful. So now I can move from a draft to a test state. If I'm going to run the test, one very important thing to remember is that now in your device properties, you have a new label for them, is if they're test or production, or you can label them as both test and production. If you have devices like in a test bed and you're emulating both test and production, you'd probably want to put that dual label on them. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and execute a test of this workflow and say it's going to execute. And when it executes, I'm going to go to the activity view. So in my intro, I was talking about 3 main views. You have your library, which we went to first. Then we went into the workflow editor, which you saw the drag and drop canvas. Now here we are in the workflow activity. Now I can dive into the log and see what's happening here. I also see from a task standpoint, as Gluware executes each task, I see the progress here and how long it took. I also can navigate into the targets, and I can see that based on my filter, I filtered for 5 devices from my 20 in my test bed that have the name Cisco in the list. So there is a benefit of using filters. It will dynamically filter for that particular criteria and then dynamically change your list. If I had to select devices, it would require a manual intervention to go in and select your devices. And so when this is running here, I can also click right all the way into the interaction with the device. So since Gluware is using our native integration and our support, in this case for Cisco iOS, you can see everything Gluware is doing at the CLI level, and get down into the details if there's anything unexpected that occurs. So let's get back into my task view here, and I can see that it looks like there's a provisioning action happening. So there is likely, based on my logic, there is a remediation that had to occur. I can look at that and see that these 2 devices had to be remediated based on my condition of drift. So I can exit out of that. And then it finished that, it completed an audit, and then executed completion of the task. So with that, since the main notification you see here is, obviously I get a lot of feedback here with exactly what happened from my audit, but I can also navigate into my email to see if I got those notifications. So let me do that real quick. And I can see here I did get the email that is notifying me that there was drift detected and remediated on these guys. I do see a small error here saying an invalid variable reference, so I can go ahead and clean that up in my workflow as I progress. Okay, so with that being done here, and just to look at that real quick, I can navigate back to my workflow library. Here's that that workflow is still in a test state, so I can go back in and edit it. And if I look at my email tasks here, if I navigate in, so you can see here I have a misspelling on my variable. This variable is called workflow name, so I want to edit that and save it. And these are two, in this particular task, the send email, I'm using two well-known variables in the system. One is the variable called the workflow name, so it'll pull in whatever you've named your workflow into the subject line of the email. And then I'm pulling in a variable called device name. So we're going to loop for each device that the filter or task requires, and we're gonna say, you know, drift was remediated and detected. So, or detected and remediated here. So I hit save here. I want to just quickly see if I have that error. No, I don't have that error here. So I had a small misspelling in my email, and through testing of the workflow, I was able to see that. And let me just look at this final one. And this final one, I didn't use the workflow variable. I just said there was an audit violation. So that would be okay as well. So I can hit cancel. And so this is the process of building a workflow in Gluware Network RPA and then executing it through draft phase, then test phase. And if I'm happy with this workflow and I now want it to be used, let's say, time and time again, and I'm not going to be kind of continually editing or tweaking it, from the validation, I hit save. And then from validation, I'm getting my notification here, from validation library, I can move it to production if I require. So let's move on to the next use case. In this next use case, we're going to have a little bit of fun in the fact that we're going to be using StackStorm and leveraging StackStorm for some notification. In this case, we're going to be doing notification with both Jira, a commonly used workflow management system folks use, like Gluware, we use it heavily, and Slack. We also use Slack very heavily. So what we're going to look at in this use case is something that we had frequently gotten requests or requirements about, which is in Gluware Device Manager, you can configure API access to Cisco for we pull numerous things, but one of the things we pull is the Cisco advisories, the PCerts, the Cisco well-known issues or disclosures that they have, as well as API connectivity to NIST, which is multi-vendor vulnerabilities known as CVEs. So underlying our Gluware Device Manager is doing that. So we have API integration there. And then what we're going to see with the workflow is that we're going to use a workflow where, you know, Gluware is looking at your underlying inventory. And then what we're able to do is do a filter using Device Manager task. If any advisory, if there's greater than one advisory, we want to execute notifications. So in this case, we're going to be doing notifications with both Jira, opening an issue, and Slack sending a notification. So with that short intro, let's switch back over to Gluware and take a look at that one. So I will go back to my workflow library here. And you know, if I had a big long list here, which I do, I could search on things that I know there's keywords, like I have Jira in the name of that particular workflow, so I can filter my list here to find that guy. So here it is here. Let's actually go back into Edit. And what we're going to see here is that, again, we're filtering our devices, and we're filtering for, in this case, again, we're pre-filtering for my Cisco devices. Then we're executing a logical operator. Now we're saying if critical advisories, which encompass both Cisco and NIST, is greater or equal to 1. So basically, if there are any advisories, I want to know about it. So if I want to know about it, I'm going to, number one, I'm going to create an issue in Jira. So this is through the StackStorm integration, and I'll talk about that in a minute here. But basically here on the project demo, I'm adding this network devices have critical advisories, and I'll just note webinar demo. Okay, and I'll hit save. And then I have a second StackStorm task, which is post a message. So I'm posting in a channel I have created called N-RPA for Network RPA. And if I look at the task, Gluware workflow ran and devices have critical advisories. So I'll also do something here and say webinar demo, save. So now you can see another flow here, and this is a real world case because let's say normally in what you're doing in your daily activities with Gluware is you're navigating in Device Manager and you're looking at stats and then making decisions. Well, now you can have it do it for you and bring your attention to you when you need to be notified, right? So this is again like a filter and a notification that critical advisories exist. So let's validate it. Let's save our changes. Let's validate and run a test, execute. And when I execute a workflow, I go to the activity view. So I can see here, it was filtered. This thing ran in 6 seconds. Again, because Gluware is running from the database this time. We're not having to go, we're already talking to the other external APIs on a regular basis. And we didn't have to go and pull the inventory. We already have it in the database. So it runs extremely quickly. We talked to Jira, through StackStorm, we talked to Jira and we talked to Slack. So let's look at that. Here's my Jira instance here, my demo board. If I scroll down here, I can see Gluware workflows, critical advisories were detected. And if I click into this, I can see network devices have critical advisories. And this is from my webinar demo. So you can see that propagated through there. Also, I will navigate into my Slack channel, and I have a channel dedicated here called N-RPA, and I can see here at the current timestamp, you can see my machine time, 226 here, 225, a Gluware workflow ran, and devices have critical advisories, and it has the Dash Webinars demo. So there we see the Slack notification. This was a demonstration we leveraged for ONUG with the CSNF, the Cloud Security Notification Framework. And really it's the premise of an external trigger. In the case of the CSNF demonstration, we integrated an API call with Azure Sentinel. So the CSNF framework determined there was a threat on the network, a security vulnerability. And as a response to that, Azure Sentinel introduced an API call, like I just demonstrated, to trigger Gluware. And in the Gluware side, we ran a workflow that was the autonomic response, which executed a drift, which you've seen with remediation, and an audit on the network. But it also did something very interesting. Using a StackStorm task, we're able to update an AWS ACL. And then along with it, we wrapped another component in, which is when you make a change to a system that, let's say you're not declarative, you don't have full closed loop, you're just basically leveraging something to make a change, you want to be able to validate the change too. So we decided to wrap and also include Ansible playbooks as a validation step, also showcasing Gluware can orchestrate Ansible through StackStorm. For this demonstration, I'm going to get signed into my Gluware instance in my admin setting here, my admin credentials, and navigate into Network RPA workflow library. What I wanted to do was show that automated security response demo. So I can see it here, automated security response demo. And we're going to go back into edit this guy. As we look at what this particular workflow does is a lot of repeat of what you've seen before in previous demos. I'm going to filter the targets. I'm going to capture config. So I'm going to run the kind of the standard things we do in terms of device management, drift, and look at if drift occurred, remediate, because there's been, in this case, it's being triggered by a security issue or a violation. I'm going to run an audit policy with notification. But here's where some of the new stuff comes in terms of, again, building out and layering in your... I'm going to be testing and orchestrating StackStorm to call Ansible playbooks. So I have an Ansible task here, which is calling a service status playbook for me. And then I am executing a AWS task, which is logging into my account, and I'm passing in the bad actor, the IP address to block. So I'm editing an ACL entry. And then I'm doing a post validation to ensure, so there's a pre-test, a change, and a post-test. So the Ansible playbooks are kind of wrapping around the change on the AWS side. And if I just kind of quickly navigate back over to my AWS view, what I want to quickly show you is to simulate this type of an environment or test, I have 2 EC2 instances running in my VPC, one emulating the public side, one emulating the private side or the target application. If I navigate again back to my home here, from a network security side, I'm implementing network ACLs, and I have a network ACL here associated with my application that is pretty much the standard. So it's defaults here, and so the whole premise here is there's a bad actor. I'm going to be dynamically updating an ACL to take action on it. So let's jump back to the workflow and go ahead and kick this off. So I'm going to validate it. And I'm going to run it, and I'm going to execute. And as it executes, I'll go to my activity view and I can see what's happening. And so while this one takes a little longer to run, I did want to take a minute and navigate into my StackStorm instance and just show you that from a PACS perspective. Again, now Gluware is automating or orchestrating StackStorm. So we have the StackStorm instance here, and the packs that I have installed are Ansible, which I'm using, AWS I'm using. You've seen Jira. You've seen Service. We didn't show ServiceNow yet, but I could demonstrate that. We've shown Slack, and so these are packs from StackStorm we're leveraging, and there's many more available here. You can check out the StackStorm exchange for all of that. Now, when I go to my history, this is kind of cool because this is where I can see when it gets to the point where I'm running a StackStorm action or activity, which I can see here. I'm provisioning devices, so I did not get to the point yet where I'm doing that component of it. There has been a drift occurred, so there's a provisioning task that's happening, so that's in progress now. When that completes, I'll move on towards my integration with Ansible and StackStorm, sorry. But as you can see from this previous one run from, I get to see all the history that Gluware is calling through StackStorm. So as that StackStorm tasks, as those things are kicked off, I will see those here. And I can see that the playbook is now, the Ansible playbook is run, and those tasks are running. So as I navigate back into my Slack, and I refresh this view here, I can see the Ansible playbook ran, and I could, here's this other, if I check the live output, this is the pre-test. So in the pre-test, I was able to ping through with this address, and I had no issues. So I'm kind of emulating testing of this bad actor. So if I go back to my StackStorm event, now we make the AWS change, and you can see here I push the change to edit that entry. And now if I navigate into my task, I can see here that same ping test executed with an Ansible playbook, there's 0 success. So effectively I can say using a ping test that my change on my VPC of my ACL, network ACL was successful. So if I navigate back into my, let me get back into the right view here. So here was that inbound access list. If I just refresh this view here, I can see here now there is a new rule that has been applied. So this is just an example where we're taking it a step further here. We're doing numerous things. We're automating through the third-party StackStorm. We're leveraging Ansible playbooks, which a lot of our customers have that they want to essentially orchestrate or incorporate with various Gluware activity. And we're making in this case, it could be a triggered. We ran it manually, but this could be a triggered. We showed you the API side of the triggered security response to then execute something like a dynamic ACL change.